The courthouse in Cedar Ridge had the quiet, tight-lipped energy of a small town that knew everyone's business but didn't want to admit it out loud. The stone steps outside were slick from an early morning drizzle, the kind that made people pull their coats tighter and frown through their fogged-up glasses. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and nervous anticipation. Reporters shuffled notebooks and cameras. Attorneys whispered last-minute reminders. Deputies stood like silent sentinels by the doors. No one really wanted to be here, except for a 3-year-old girl named Mia. Mia's presence was almost an afterthought to most, except for Deputy Ross, who had been briefed on what to expect. She was tiny, barely taller than the bench she was supposed to sit on, with curls that bounced rebelliously from the top of her head as if trying to avoid the tension that filled the room. Her eyes were wide, bright, and terrified, scanning the courthouse as if she had walked into a forest of strangers and predators. She clutched a stuffed rabbit with bent ears so tightly her small knuckles were white, and every so often she brought it to her lips as though it could shield her from what was to come. The room itself was a paradox of chaos restrained by decorum. The judge sat high, her robe dark against the polished wood, her face unreadable, though the tight set of her jaw betrayed a flicker of impatience. The attorney's shoes tapped the marble floors like drumbeats of a slow war, each step echoing louder than their voices in the tense hush of the courtroom. And yet, amid all of this adult intensity, Mia's small presence somehow shifted the atmosphere. It was a delicate weight, like the first note of a song that foretells a storm. Deputy Ross, a tall, broad-shouldered officer in a sharply pressed uniform, entered with a presence that seemed to both fill the room and protect it. But he wasn't alone. At his side was Shadow, a black German shepherd with eyes like polished coal, trained not just for protection, but for support, especially for the kind of fragile witnesses that Mia represented. The dog's movements were smooth and controlled, tail low and ears attentive, exuding a quiet authority that even the most hardened courtroom personnel couldn't ignore. When Mia saw Shadow, her tiny chest rose and fell rapidly. She blinked up at him, then at Deputy Ross, her little fingers tightening around the rabbit. In a moment that seemed suspended in time, the room collectively leaned forward, drawn in by the silent communication between a 3-year-old and a dog. Mia's gaze lingered on Shadow in a way that suggested recognition, not fear, trust, not uncertainty. It was as if she could see something in him that no one else could. Deputy Ross knelt slowly, careful not to overwhelm her. "Hey, Mia," he said gently, "do you want to meet Shadow?" Mia's lips parted slightly and she made a small, uncertain nod. She stepped forward, tiny shoes scuffing the polished floor. Shadow sat, head tilted, watching her approach. When she reached out, the dog leaned slightly into her touch, his fur soft and warm beneath her small fingers. Then, in a whisper that cut through the low murmur of the courtroom, Mia spoke. "He knows." The words were so soft that only Deputy Ross caught them immediately. He leaned closer, careful not to startle her. "He knows what, sweetheart?" Mia looked up at Shadow, eyes wide and solemn, and repeated, "He knows who was in my room." A wave of silence crashed across the room. Reporters froze, pens hovering mid-air. Attorneys exchanged quick glances, and the judge's eyebrows lifted. No one had anticipated that a 3-year-old could articulate anything remotely this specific, or chilling. The defense attorney stood abruptly, voice sharp, slicing through the quiet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. A child of 3 cannot." The judge raised a hand, and the motion died in the air. "Let the child speak," she said, her voice firm but carrying the weight of careful consideration. The courtroom leaned forward as if the walls themselves wanted to hear what came next. Mia's tiny hand rested on Shadow's collar. She whispered again, "He was scared too." The tension in the room escalated in seconds. There was a subtle shift, a brush of electricity. Shadow's ears pricked forward, his low, rumbling growl barely audible, but distinct enough to make even the seasoned deputies glance around nervously. No one spoke for a long, suspended moment. The adults were trying to reconcile logic with what their eyes and ears were witnessing. A child, barely old enough to count to 3, was standing in the middle of a courtroom and describing a fear that everyone else felt but hadn't been able to articulate. Deputy Ross gently encouraged Mia to come closer to the stand. Her steps were tentative, almost hesitant, yet determined. Each tiny footstep sounded disproportionately loud in the heavy, quiet room, echoing against the polished floors and wood panels like the first drops of rain in a thunderstorm. Shadow followed silently, a guardian moving with measured grace, muscles coiled in anticipation. Mia climbed onto the small chair at the witness stand, her legs dangling, feet swinging just above the floor. Her stuffed rabbit was pressed to her chest like a shield, and she hugged it tighter when she saw the man across the room, the man she had mentioned in fragments of her whispers, the man who would be named later, whose presence alone made her knees shake. Deputy Ross knelt again beside her. "Do you want Shadow to stay right here?" he asked gently. She nodded vigorously, eyes locked on the dog, and whispered, "Don't let him go." Shadow lowered his body, positioning himself directly beside her chair, one massive paw lightly touching the floor, the other subtly brushing her leg in a protective gesture. It was more than training, it was instinct. And in that instinct, Mia found courage she didn't know she possessed. The room, heavy with tension, waited. Cameras focused, pens scribbled rapidly, and the judge leaned forward, curiosity and unease flickering across her stern face. What would a 3-year-old say next? Could such a tiny witness have anything of substance, anything that could tip the scales of a courtroom in the middle of a custody battle so tangled it had already consumed half the town's gossip? Then Mia's gaze shifted slightly, and she leaned toward Shadow. Her lips parted again, and the whisper was so faint that only Deputy Ross caught it. "Shadow knows who did it." The courtroom collectively held its breath. The words hung in the air like a dense fog, impossible to ignore, impossible to process fully. Every adult in that room, reporter, attorney, deputy, even the judge, felt the weight of the statement, the implications swimming just below the surface. Shadow's growl rose a fraction, a subtle warning that was enough to make the gallery shift uneasily. The tension was nearly tangible, thick enough to slice with a knife. Deputy Ross gave her a reassuring smile and whispered, "It's okay. You're safe. Shadow's here." Mia looked at him, then at Shadow, then back to the courtroom, her tiny voice gaining strength. "He's scared too." Every adult present stiffened. The idea that a child could perceive, interpret, and react to fear in the presence of a trained police dog was both unnerving and awe-inspiring. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't just a stage for legal arguments. It was a theater of raw, unfiltered truth, filtered through the fragile lens of a child. As Mia wrapped her fingers tightly around Shadow's collar, the camera lights clicked and flashed, reporters whispered into microphones, and attorneys exchanged looks of disbelief. The adult world, built on logic, statutes, and precedent, suddenly felt flimsy in the face of this small child, and her unshakable bond with a dog who understood far more than anyone had ever expected. And then Mia, with eyes bright and unwavering, leaned closer to Shadow and whispered words that no one, absolutely no one, expected to hear in a courtroom. "I know who came in my room, and Shadow knows too." A collective shiver ran through the room. The air was thick with anticipation, as if everyone in the courthouse had suddenly realized they were on the edge of something monumental. The judge cleared her throat, glancing over the top of her glasses. "We will proceed," she said, voice steady but tense. "Let the child tell her story." Mia's lips curved into a tiny, determined smile. Shadow pressed closer, and for a moment the entire courtroom leaned forward together, caught in a suspended moment of fear, curiosity, and disbelief. Because no one knew yet what a 3-year-old and a K9 could reveal that would shock the town, change the courtroom, and alter the course of a case in ways no one could have anticipated. In that moment, ended with a whisper, a growl, and a room full of people waiting for the truth to step forward. The courtroom had barely absorbed the weight of Mia's words before the silence thickened again, heavier than before. The adults, lawyers, deputies, journalists, even the judge, looked at each other in disbelief, as though trying to silently confirm that they had heard correctly. A 3-year-old, speaking with clarity that belied her age, had just indicated that the K-9 sitting silently by her side understood what happened in her room. Deputy Ross crouched slightly beside her, keeping his voice low and gentle, mindful of the fragile courage in her wide, trembling eyes. "Mia," he said softly, "can you tell me what you mean?" Mia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced at Shadow, and the dog leaned slightly toward her, ears pricked, nose twitching as though waiting for her to speak. For a moment, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath along with her. He knows," she repeated, barely above a whisper, her fingers clutching Shadow's fur as though holding onto her only lifeline. Deputy Ross nodded slowly. "Shadow knows what, sweetie?" Her tiny voice wavered as she finally spoke the words that would send ripples through the room. "He knows who was in my room." Every adult froze. Pens paused mid-scribble. Cameras clicked, some capturing the moment, some faltering under the sudden tension. The prosecutor leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "The witness, he's a dog," he said cautiously, but his voice lacked the certainty of conviction. "We cannot interpret a dog's behavior as evidence." But Deputy Ross stayed still, eyes never leaving Mia. "It's not the dog we're relying on," he said gently. "It's what Mia remembers, and what she's telling us Shadow saw too." Mia's eyes grew wide. "He was scared too," she whispered, pressing her small hand further into Shadow's thick fur. The dog gave a low, guttural growl, just audible enough to make even seasoned deputies instinctively glance around. The defense attorney shot up from his chair, voice sharp, slicing through the charged air. "Your Honor, this is absurd. A 3-year-old cannot be considered a credible witness on her own, let alone in coordination with a dog." The judge raised a hand, cutting him off. Her eyes scanned the room, meeting the gaze of each adult present, calm but steel-edged. "We will proceed," she said firmly. "The child is allowed to speak. We will determine credibility through what is said, not through assumptions." Mia swallowed hard, looking up at Shadow with a tiny tremor of courage building in her chest. Then she shifted slightly and looked toward the man sitting stiffly across the courtroom. He was wearing a gray baseball cap pulled low, shoulders tense, fists clenched. A collective hush swept through the room as people suddenly noticed him, the man she had just alluded to. Deputy Ross leaned closer, whispering to Mia, "Do you want to tell us who it was?" Mia's lips pressed together, and for a brief moment she hesitated. The courtroom waited, charged with anticipation. Even Shadow seemed to sense the importance of the moment, muscles coiled, eyes alert. Finally, in a voice so small it seemed impossible it could be heard across the room, Mia whispered, "The man." All eyes followed her tiny finger as she pointed. It wasn't toward her father, not toward her mother, not toward any figure of authority. It was toward the man in the gray cap, whose face now drained of color. His eyes widened in recognition, and for a brief second the rigid facade cracked, revealing a flash of panic that was almost humanly audible. Shadow's growl rose slightly, deep and warning. The dog's body tensed as though preparing for the worst. Deputy Ross instinctively placed himself a step closer, his hand hovering near Mia in silent protection. The judge exhaled slowly, a sign that she too felt the tension mounting. "Sir," she said, addressing the man in the cap, "please remain seated." The man's jaw tightened, and his eyes flicked nervously from Mia to Shadow, as if realizing the child and the dog had formed an unspoken alliance against him. For a split second, it felt as though the air itself had thickened, pressing down on every person in the room, trapping them in an invisible tension that could only end one way. Prosecutor Jensen cleared his throat, his voice steady but edged with disbelief. "Mia," he said gently, "can you tell us what you saw or what happened?" Mia clutched Shadow's fur like a lifeline, the only solid certainty in a world suddenly too big and too dangerous. "He came in at night," she said, voice shaking. "When Mommy was sleeping, he smelled like smoke." A hush swept across the courtroom. The phrase "smelled like smoke" made every adult involuntarily lean back, as though the scent itself had materialized in the room. Whispers fluttered like wings. This was no longer a custody battle alone. The man in the gray cap stiffened. His lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, his aura of calm authority completely evaporated, replaced by the raw panic of someone who had been discovered. Deputy Ross kept his hand lightly on Mia's shoulder, a quiet anchor. "And Shadow," he asked gently, "what did Shadow do?" Mia's eyes filled with tears. "He barked, but the man said if I made noise he'd hurt Shadow," she said, voice cracking. Shadow pressed against her as though validating every word. The deep, warning growl echoed faintly through the room again, reinforcing the sense that this was no ordinary situation. The judge removed her glasses, blinking rapidly, processing the moment in real time. "Everyone please," she said, voice calm but firm. "We will allow the child to testify. Security will remain close." The man in the gray cap shifted in his seat, clearly aware that every eye in the courtroom was now on him. He muttered something under his breath, incomprehensible but tense, and the deputies leaned forward. Shadow, still alert, sniffed the air, sensing the tension, his body taut as a drawn bow. Journalists scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, but even the media paused at the next words Mia uttered. "He said I couldn't tell, but I remember." Her voice wavered, but there was unmistakable steel in it. Even at 3, she could communicate the clarity of memory and fear. Deputy Ross whispered encouragement. "It's okay, Mia. You're safe now. Shadow is here. Just tell us what happened." The tiny child inhaled sharply. "He came, and he wanted me to be quiet. I hid under the bed, but Shadow tried to get in through the window. He barked and barked. He was scared too." A stunned silence followed. The courtroom's collective breath seemed to hang suspended, as though the very air had been arrested by the gravity of a 3-year-old's words. The man in the gray cap paled further, lips pressed tight, hands gripping the edge of his chair. Shadow's eyes never left him, ears forward, every instinct focused on protecting Mia and reinforcing her unspoken account. Prosecutor Jensen leaned toward the judge, whispering so only she could hear, "Your Honor, this changes everything. We may have evidence we didn't anticipate." The judge nodded slightly, though her face remained composed. "We will handle it carefully," she said. Her tone, though measured, carried an unspoken acknowledgement. This was no ordinary testimony. Mia, feeling some strength from Shadow's steadfast presence, pulled her rabbit closer and whispered again, "He was in my room, and Shadow knows too." A low murmur of recognition swept through the courtroom. This wasn't just about custody, wasn't just about law, it was about trust, courage, and the inexplicable bond between a child and a dog who could sense danger. Everyone present felt it. Something extraordinary was unfolding. Deputy Ross exhaled slowly, letting the moment settle. "That's right, Mia. You're safe now," he said. But even as he spoke, he knew the room had shifted. Nothing would ever feel the same. Shadow nudged Mia gently with his nose, a silent gesture of solidarity and protection. Mia leaned into the dog, her wide eyes reflecting the enormity of the moment. She had spoken the truth, and for a 3-year-old, that was braver than anything any adult in that room could have imagined. And in that silence, just for a heartbeat, the courtroom realized the truth. The next words Mia spoke could unravel everything. Because the child had not finished her story. And when she did, the room would never recover from what they heard next. The courtroom seemed to shrink around Mia as she sat on the witness stand, Shadow sitting close beside her, muscles coiled, eyes alert, tail still but tense. The man in the gray cap had turned stiff, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his chair. There was a tightness in his jaw, a cold panic in his eyes, as though he realized that everything, the truth, the law, even the perception of the adults in the room, was beginning to close in on him. Deputy Ross stayed crouched at Mia's side, a reassuring anchor, his voice calm but firm. "It's okay, Mia," he whispered. "You're safe here. Just tell the truth. Tell them what happened." Mia's tiny hands tightened around Shadow's fur. She took a deep breath, one that seemed far too big for a child her age, and opened her mouth to speak. Her words were deliberate, careful, and filled with the clarity of memory that seemed impossible for someone so young. "He came in my room at night," she said, her voice trembling but strong enough to carry through the hushed room. "When Mommy was sleeping, I tried to hide, but he saw me." The adults in the room shifted uncomfortably. There was a low murmur among the reporters. Some whispered to their cameras, trying to capture the raw gravity of a toddler describing a break-in and fear that had haunted her imagination, and perhaps her reality, for weeks. Prosecutor Jensen leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice gentle but insistent. "Mia, can you tell us what happened next?" Mia nodded. "He told me to be quiet. If I made a sound, he would hurt Shadow." Her lips trembled as she said the words, but her small hands gripped the dog as if drawing strength from him. Shadow leaned slightly into her, head tilted, eyes scanning the man in the gray cap, warning him silently with every muscle in his body. The courtroom collectively shivered. The tension was tangible, like static electricity in the air. No one had expected a toddler to speak with such precision about danger, nor did they expect that a K-9, trained to sense fear and protect, would respond with such instinctual vigilance. The man in the gray cap shifted in his seat. His face was pale, jaw tight. He muttered something under his breath, barely audible, but it carried a tone of recognition, fear, guilt, and panic all mixed together. Shadow's ears flicked, a low growl vibrating from deep in his chest. Every adult present instinctively knew something had shifted. Deputy Ross knelt closer, brushing a gentle hand along Mia's back. "You're doing great," he said. "Tell us what Shadow did." Mia looked down at the dog, eyes wide, reflecting the bond of trust and mutual understanding. "He tried to get in through the window," she said, voice quivering. "He barked and barked, but the man stopped him. He said I couldn't tell anyone, but I remember." A gasp swept across the room. Journalists scribbled furiously, cameras clicked. Even the judge, usually composed and stoic, paused for a moment, removing her glasses and blinking rapidly. The implications were staggering. What had been a custody case had suddenly morphed into something far darker. A 3-year-old had just provided a window into a crime that no one could ignore. The prosecutor, sensing the momentum, leaned in closer. "Mia, do you remember anything else? Anything else that happened that night?" Mia's small brow furrowed, lips pursed in concentration. He was in my room for a long time. I tried to hide. He smelled like smoke. I tried to scream, but Shadow barked and he told me not to." Her voice shook, but there was an unmistakable honesty in it, a clarity that made the man in the gray cap flinch. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The gravity of the situation was suffocating. No one knew how to react. Shock, fear, disbelief, anger, all tangled together in a tense silence. Deputy Ross's hand remained near Mia, ready to protect, ready to reassure. Shadow, his body coiled, eyes fixed on the man in the gray cap, gave a low, warning growl. He wasn't just a dog. In that moment, he was a living, breathing witness, a silent partner to Mia's truth. The judge cleared her throat, breaking the spell just slightly. "We will allow the testimony to continue," she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the weight of what was unfolding before her. Child witnesses, no matter how young, are allowed to speak, and sometimes the smallest voices carry the heaviest truths. Mia nodded solemnly, her tiny shoulders stiff with determination. "He came in again," she whispered, voice barely audible. "He wanted me to be quiet, but Shadow tried to protect me. He barked. He tried to get through the window, but the man stopped him. The man in the gray cap tensed, eyes darting to the window, as though imagining the dog had somehow attempted an impossible rescue. He muttered again, under his breath, and his fingers trembled slightly on the edge of his chair. Deputy Ross kept his voice calm, steady, grounding Mia in the midst of the chaos. "Mia, can you tell us if you saw anything else? Anything that might help us understand?" Her tiny fingers fidgeted in Shadow's thick fur. He had a box," she whispered. "A box with something inside. I don't know what it was, but Shadow barked when he saw it." A ripple of tension ran through the room. The mention of the box, combined with Mia's clarity and Shadow's reactions, suggested tangible evidence that could be verified, a potential turning point in the case. The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat, muttering to himself, "This is inadmissible. A child of 3 cannot." The judge's gavel came down with authority, silencing him immediately. "Objection noted and overruled. The witness may continue." Mia took a deep breath, clutching Shadow tighter, drawing courage from his presence. "I was scared," she admitted, voice cracking. "He said if I made noise he'd hurt Shadow. Shadow, he barked. He growled. He tried to stop him." Even the most hardened courtroom veterans felt a chill run down their spines. The image of a small child, cornered and terrified, relying on a dog's instinct to protect her, was raw, real, and horrifying in its simplicity. Deputy Ross whispered encouragement, and Mia looked up at him, eyes wide. He can't do it again," she said. "Shadow will stop him." The man in the gray cap's face went pale. He shifted uncomfortably, realizing that the child and the dog together had formed an unbreakable alliance. Shadow's low growl continued, resonating through the courtroom like a warning. "Step closer, and you risk everything." The prosecutor leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice steady. "Mia, can you tell us where he was when this happened?" Mia's tiny finger pointed vaguely toward the gallery, not at her parents, not at the attorneys, but directly at the man in the gray cap. "There," she said. "He was there." The courtroom fell silent again. Every eye followed her finger, resting on the man whose composure had now completely shattered. He could no longer hide behind a facade of innocence or detachment. Even the deputies glanced at each other, exchanging subtle nods, realizing the significance of Mia's testimony. Shadow shifted slightly, pressing closer to Mia, protective and vigilant. His eyes never left the man. He had sensed the danger, understood it in ways no human could, and now he was asserting his presence, his authority, and his loyalty to Mia. The judge exhaled slowly, removing her glasses. "We will continue," she said, voice quiet but resolute. "This child is a witness, and sometimes witnesses appear in forms we least expect." Mia's lips trembled, but there was determination in her gaze. "He shouldn't have come," she said softly. But Shadow tried to stop him. Shadow knew. He was scared too. A shiver ran through the courtroom. The image was vivid. A small child, terrified, clinging to a dog who understood more than any adult, who sensed the danger and tried to intervene. The room was alive with tension, the sense that something monumental was about to unfold, something that would change the case, and the town, forever. Deputy Ross whispered once more, "You're safe now, Mia. You're not alone." Mia looked down at Shadow, pressing her cheek against his fur. "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know he's with me." The courtroom waited, every adult holding their breath, because they knew the next words Mia would speak could unravel everything. And as Mia inhaled, preparing to speak again, Shadow growled, low and warning, eyes fixed on the man in the gray cap. No one in the courtroom could anticipate what Mia would say next. And when she did, the room would never be the same again. The courtroom was taut with anticipation, every person present suspended between disbelief and fear. Mia sat upright on the witness stand, clutching Shadow's fur as though the dog's presence alone could anchor her in the storm unfolding around her. Shadow's ears were pricked, muscles coiled, and every inch of his body radiated alertness. He sensed danger with a clarity humans could barely comprehend, and now his focus was singular: the man in the gray cap. Deputy Ross crouched beside Mia, whispering encouragement. "You're doing great," he said softly, hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "Just tell them what happened. Shadow is here with you." Mia blinked, swallowing hard. Her tiny lips trembled, her blue eyes wide and unblinking. She had already recounted the terror she experienced that night, the man entering her room, the smell of smoke, the threats and Shadow's instinct to protect her. But now she hesitated for a moment, tilting her head as if recalling a memory that weighed heavily on her young mind. The prosecutor leaned forward, voice gentle yet urgent. "Mia, can you tell us who it was?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Every adult in the room stiffened. Cameras clicked, pens hovered midair, and even the judge leaned slightly forward, removing her glasses and watching the child intently. The man in the gray cap's face grew pale, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his chair. Mia's gaze drifted toward him, her tiny finger rising slowly, trembling slightly as if it carried the weight of something far too heavy for her age. Shadow shifted closer, pressing protectively against her leg. "He was there," Mia said softly, her voice quivering. Then, almost under her breath, she added the words that would electrify the room. "It was Uncle Ben." A collective gasp exploded. The word echoed off the polished walls of the courtroom, ricocheting in shocked murmurs. Reporters froze mid-scribble, cameras lingered in focus, and attorneys exchanged glances that ranged from disbelief to horror. Even the judge's composed facade faltered for the briefest instant. The man in the gray cap, Uncle Ben, stiffened so suddenly that it seemed as though his body had been struck. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again, and his eyes darted nervously around the room as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Every breath he took was shallow and uneven, betraying the calm he had tried so desperately to project. Deputy Ross's hand hovered protectively near Mia, instinctively prepared to shield her if needed. Shadow growled low in his throat, a deep, warning sound that resonated through the courtroom and reverberated off the wooden panels. The dog's gaze never left Uncle Ben, unflinching, unrelenting. The judge exhaled slowly, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her. "Order," she said, voice firm, commanding the room to quiet. "Mr. Bennett, remain seated. Security, please ensure the witness is safe." Uncle Ben swallowed hard, eyes darting toward Mia. For the first time he appeared vulnerable, weak, afraid, caught in a trap of his own making. The deputies stationed near him shifted slightly, hands hovering near his arms, ready to intervene if he attempted anything. Shadow's growl deepened, a rumble that resonated not just in the room but in the bones of every person present. Prosecutor Jensen leaned forward, a mix of disbelief and professional focus etched on his face. "Mia, did Uncle Ben do anything else that night?" His voice was calm, but the weight behind it pressed heavily on the air. Mia nodded, her small hands clutching Shadow's fur tightly. "He told me not to tell Mommy. He said if I did, Shadow would get hurt. I hid, but he saw me." She shivered slightly, though her voice carried the unmistakable clarity of memory. Shadow barked. He tried to stop him. He was scared too. The courtroom seemed to shrink under the weight of the revelation. The adults present, reporters, deputies, lawyers, felt a collective chill. This was no longer about custody disputes or legal maneuvering. This was a confrontation with fear, with danger, with raw truth delivered in the voice of a child. Uncle Ben's hands trembled slightly on the edge of the chair. His lips moved, forming words that went unheard over the charged silence, a futile attempt to deny what had been revealed. Shadow's eyes narrowed, muscles taut, growl low and threatening. The dog's awareness, instinctive and immediate, made even the toughest men in the room recoil subtly. Deputy Ross leaned closer to Mia. "It's okay, Mia. You're doing the right thing," he whispered. Her small fingers tightened around his hand for a moment, then released. She took a deep breath, courage flickering in her young chest. "I remember," she said, her voice growing steadier, filled with the quiet power of conviction. "He took something. A box. He didn't want Mommy to see it. Shadow tried to stop him." The phrase hung in the room like a storm cloud, heavy with implication. The notion of a tangible object, stolen or hidden, combined with Mia's clear testimony and Shadow's instinctive reactions, was enough to make even experienced courtroom professionals pause. The judge's gavel came down lightly, trying to restore order, but the tension remained palpable. "This testimony is noted," she said quietly, scanning the courtroom. "Security, ensure the witness remains protected. We will proceed carefully." Mia's eyes scanned the room, darting briefly to reporters, to her mother, then back to Shadow. The dog leaned into her, a silent reassurance that she was not alone, that the truth she carried in her tiny hands was supported by the most loyal of allies. Prosecutor Jensen's voice cut through the tension, calm but firm. "Mia, did Uncle Ben say anything else?" She nodded slowly. "He said I couldn't tell anyone. He said if I told, Shadow would get hurt, but I remembered." Her voice cracked slightly and a tear rolled down her cheek. Shadow nudged her gently, licking her hand as though saying, "You're safe. I've got you." The courtroom was silent, everyone processing the weight of the words. The man who had seemed untouchable moments before was now exposed in front of the town, the law, and a child who carried the clarity of truth far beyond her years. Deputy Ross glanced at the security officers. "Keep him calm, but keep him restrained," he said softly. "We don't know what he might do." Shadow growled again, low and steady, eyes locked on Uncle Ben. It wasn't just a dog's warning, it was a declaration. "You will not threaten this child, not tonight, not ever." The judge exhaled again, voice quiet but resolute. "We will allow the testimony to continue. Child witnesses, no matter how young, are entitled to speak, and sometimes the truth comes in forms we do not expect." Mia's gaze returned to Uncle Ben. "He shouldn't have come," she whispered. But Shadow tried to stop him. He knew he was scared too. The man in the gray cap's face was a pale mask, jaw tight, fingers trembling. He muttered something inaudible under his breath, his earlier confidence now completely shattered. Shadow's growl grew louder, a deep, visceral sound that resonated in the bones of everyone present. The prosecutor, sensing the momentum, leaned in. "Mia, where is the box now? Do you remember?" Mia shook her head slowly, lips pressed together. "I don't know, he took it." Her small hands clutched Shadow tighter, seeking comfort and strength from the dog. Shadow pressed closer, as if reinforcing her courage and lending his silent testimony to her words. The courtroom held its collective breath. The revelation of Uncle Ben, combined with the child's testimony and the dog's instinctive responses, had transformed the case. No longer was it merely a custody dispute. It had become a confrontation with a hidden danger, with truth emerging in its most raw and unfiltered form. Deputy Ross whispered encouragement once more, and Mia looked up, small but resolute. "I told you," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Shadow knows. He saw it all." The judge removed her glasses, voice quiet but firm. "This changes the proceedings. Security will remain close, and the witness will continue. This is no ordinary testimony, and everyone present must respect the gravity of this situation." Shadow leaned in close to Mia, a silent guardian, unwavering and alert. And for the first time the courtroom realized. The next words from this child could unravel not just the man in the gray cap, but the entire narrative that had brought them all here. Mia took a deep breath, eyes scanning the courtroom once more. She swallowed, then whispered words that would leave everyone frozen in suspense. "Mommy, he's coming back." The courtroom gasped. The weight of the statement hung like a storm cloud, heavy and foreboding. Even the judge, who had seen countless cases, felt a shiver run down her spine. The room tightened with tension. Shadow growled low, muscles tensed, eyes locked on Uncle Ben. The dog's instincts screamed warning, anticipation, and protection. Deputy Ross instinctively moved closer to Mia, hand hovering near her shoulder. Everyone knew, in that suspended moment, that the story was far from over. The courtroom had entered a dangerous new chapter. And no one could predict what would happen next. The courtroom hung in a tense silence, thick as fog after Mia's words. Everyone's attention was fixed on her small frame and the dark figure of Shadow, who pressed close to her side like a living shield. Uncle Ben sat frozen in his chair, knuckles white, jaw clenched, every muscle rigid with panic and dread. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Deputy Ross stayed close, one hand hovering near Mia, the other resting lightly on Shadow, a protective tether. "It's okay, Mia," he whispered. "Just breathe, you're safe. We've got you." Mia inhaled, clutching Shadow tightly, as if drawing courage from his very presence. The man in the gray cap, Uncle Ben, shifted slightly, his foot tapping nervously against the floor. He muttered something low and unintelligible, almost a plea, almost a threat, his eyes fixed on the child. Shadow growled, low and throaty, and the sound reverberated through the courtroom, vibrating in the bones of every adult present. Then, just as the tension reached a peak, the lights flickered. A sudden hum filled the room as darkness swallowed the space, the glow from the windows and cameras vanishing. The courtroom went completely black for a moment. Gasps erupted, chairs scraped against the floor, and a flurry of whispers swirled like smoke. Even trained deputies froze for a split second. Cameras clicked in vain, capturing nothing but black frames. Deputy Ross instinctively moved in front of Mia, guiding her slightly closer to Shadow. "Stay calm," he ordered quietly, though his own voice carried a tension that belied his professional calm. Shadow pressed against Mia, muscles taut, growl vibrating faintly in the darkness. Then they heard it. A soft, uneven breath somewhere in the courtroom, distinct against the murmur of startled adults. Someone, or something, was moving in the darkness. "Stay where you are," Ross called out, voice firm, commanding. Security officers shuffled forward, flashlights flicking on. Shadows danced across the walls as the beams cut through the darkness. Every eye snapped toward the direction of the sound, trying to locate the source. And then, just before the light fully returned, they saw him. Uncle Ben, half rising from his chair, hands twitching toward the aisle as though he had been planning to flee. His face was pale, lips tight, eyes wide with panic. He froze as Shadow, in a single fluid movement, lunged forward, teeth bared, growl low and unmistakable. The dog's presence was electric, alive, sentient, more than anyone could have imagined. Security surged forward, restraining him. His eyes were wild, darting from Shadow to Mia, to Deputy Ross, to the officers surrounding him. Every instinct screamed that he had been caught, but his panic had not yet fully translated into compliance. A sudden hush fell as the lights stabilized, revealing the courtroom in its entirety. The tension was almost unbearable. Reporters gawked, pens midair, cameras trained on the drama unfolding. The judge exhaled slowly, hands pressed to her desk, her voice tight but authoritative. "Order, everyone remain calm," she commanded. "Witness is safe. Security, maintain control of the suspect immediately." Uncle Ben's muttering became louder, almost desperate, but it was incomprehensible over the chaos. Shadow's low growl intensified, a vibration that made even the hardened deputies tense. The dog's body was rigid, every muscle coiled, eyes locked on Uncle Ben as if ready to spring again. Deputy Ross moved slightly closer to Mia, crouching to shield her. "Mia, it's okay," he said gently. "He can't hurt you. Shadow's here. We've got you." Mia pressed her face into Shadow's fur, shivering, but the dog's warmth and steady presence seemed to fortify her courage. He can't come near me," she whispered, voice small but determined. "Shadow, he's scared too." The judge exhaled, a long, slow breath, absorbing the magnitude of the moment. "Security," she said, voice steady. "Escort the suspect to a secure holding area. The witness will remain protected. Court will resume after the immediate threat is removed." Deputy Ross nodded, brushing his hand gently along Mia's back. "That's it," he said softly. "You're okay. You're safe now." Shadow pressed close, almost nuzzling her head, affirming the unspoken bond between protector and protected. As the deputies moved Uncle Ben toward the exit, he struggled briefly, muttering incoherently, then went silent under the firm grip of the officers. Shadow's growl lowered but did not disappear entirely, a reminder that the dog remained vigilant, the memory of threat still fresh in his instincts. The courtroom exhaled collectively. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing what they could, their notebooks filling with fragments of what would become the story of the year. Lawyers whispered to each other, analyzing implications, revising strategy on the fly. Even the judge, composed as ever, seemed momentarily shaken by the raw intensity of what had just occurred. Mia, small and fragile, still clutched Shadow's fur. Her tiny face, partially hidden in the dog's thick black coat, peeked out with wide eyes. Did he leave?" she asked softly, her voice trembling with lingering fear. Deputy Ross smiled gently, brushing her hair from her face. "Yes, Mia, he's gone, you're safe. Shadow's here. We're not letting anyone hurt you." Shadow let out a quiet, reassuring whine, pressing close, letting Mia feel the security of his body. She clutched him tighter, drawing courage from his unwavering presence. The judge called the courtroom back to order. "We will proceed with caution," she said, voice firm. "The witness remains under protection. This testimony is critical, and we will ensure it continues safely." Prosecutor Jensen leaned forward, looking at Mia with a combination of respect and awe. "Mia," he said gently, "can you tell us more about what happened?" Mia nodded slightly, still trembling, still holding Shadow tightly. He came in my room. He said I couldn't tell anyone. He tried to take something, a box." Shadow barked. He tried to stop him. The courtroom went still again. The detail of the box, the silent testimony of the dog, and the courage of the child combined into a chilling reality. This was no longer a custody case. This was an unfolding story of danger, bravery, and truth revealed through the most unexpected witnesses. The judge removed her glasses, voice quiet but resolute. "We will continue. Witness, please remain calm. Security will maintain control." Mia leaned into Shadow, the dog's steady presence grounding her. She had faced fear far beyond her years, and now, with Shadow beside her, she felt a flicker of courage. Deputy Ross whispered reassurance. "You're doing great, just a little longer. Shadow's here, and we're not letting anything happen to you." Mia looked up, small voice firm despite the fear still lingering. "I know, Shadow's scared too, but he's trying to help me." The room held its breath. Everyone realized, in that suspended moment, that the next words from this tiny child could either illuminate the full truth or unravel the fragile calm that now enveloped the courtroom. Shadow growled once more, low and steady, eyes locked on the direction Uncle Ben had been taken. The dog's instincts, honed through years of training, remained sharp and unyielding. Deputy Ross's hand remained on Mia, protective, guiding, steadying her as the weight of the day pressed down. And then, in the quiet aftermath of darkness, Mia whispered words that would make the courtroom hold its collective breath. "He's coming back." The room froze. Every adult, every official, every reporter felt the gravity of her words. The sense of impending danger was almost palpable, like a shadow moving across the walls, stretching longer with every heartbeat. Shadow's growl deepened, a living echo of instinctive understanding. Deputy Ross tightened his stance, ready to act. Even the judge leaned forward, pulse quickening beneath the surface of her composed demeanor. The courtroom had reached a tipping point. The air was electric, heavy with fear, anticipation, and the raw intensity of truth poised on the edge of revelation. No one knew what would happen next. but everyone knew it would change the courtroom forever. The courtroom was heavy with anticipation, still trembling from the darkness and the sudden chaos. Even as Uncle Ben had been escorted away, the tension lingered like smoke in the air, settling into every corner of the polished wood room. Reporters whispered frantically, trying to capture every fleeting moment, while deputies maintained their vigil, eyes sharp and hands ready. Mia sat on the witness stand, small and fragile, pressed close to Shadow, who remained rigidly alert. His black fur shimmered under the courtroom lights, eyes scanning every movement with unrelenting vigilance. He was more than a dog. He was Mia's shield, her confidant, and her living witness to the horrors she had endured. Deputy Ross crouched beside her, voice low and steady. "Mia," he said softly, "you're safe now. You don't have to be scared. Just tell us what you remember. Shadow is with you." Mia clutched Shadow's fur tightly, inhaling shakily. Her little mind had been a whirlwind of fear and confusion, but something seemed to shift within her. Her eyes, bright and wide, began to focus with a clarity that belied her age. It was as though a part of her memory, previously locked behind fear and instinct, was suddenly returning. She whispered, tiny voice trembling. "He came back, I remember." The room grew still. Reporters froze mid-scribble, cameras focused on the unfolding drama, and even the judge leaned slightly forward, removing her glasses, sensing the weight of what was about to be revealed. Deputy Ross gently encouraged her. "Mia, what do you remember? Take your time, tell us slowly." Mia's lips pressed together, her fingers kneading Shadow's fur as though drawing courage from the dog's presence. He opened the window," she began. Her voice quivered but grew stronger with each word. "I saw him climb in and Shadow barked. He was scared. He tried to stop him." The courtroom exhaled collectively. Every person present realized that this tiny child, barely old enough to understand the world fully, was recounting events with terrifying clarity. Shadow's low growl vibrated through the room, a living echo of the danger Mia had faced. Prosecutor Jensen leaned forward, voice gentle but insistent. "Mia, what did Uncle Ben do when he came in?" Mia's small fingers tightened around Shadow's fur, knuckles white. He looked for the box. I hid under the bed, but he saw me. He told me I couldn't tell anyone. If I did, Shadow would get hurt." Shadow pressed closer, his massive head brushing against her shoulder, reassuring, protective. Every muscle in his body was coiled, ready to act, as though sensing that Uncle Ben's presence, even removed from the room, still posed a threat. The courtroom was silent. The implication was clear. Mia had endured not just fear, but a deliberate, sustained threat. The gravity of a toddler's testimony, combined with the instinctive behavior of a trained police dog, created a tension so palpable it seemed to vibrate through the polished floors. The judge exhaled slowly, her voice quiet but firm. "Witness, please continue. Security will ensure your safety. Everyone else remain seated and calm." Mia nodded, tiny face pale but determined. He touched the box," she said softly. "I saw it. Shadow barked and barked. He tried to stop him." The mention of the box caused a ripple across the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras zoomed in, and the attorneys leaned forward, realizing that a tangible piece of evidence had just been introduced through the words of a 3-year-old. Deputy Ross whispered encouragement, crouching closer. "That's right, Mia. You're doing great. What happened next?" Mia inhaled deeply, her voice trembling but growing stronger. He left, but he looked at me. I knew he'd be back." Her small hands pressed tightly into Shadow's fur, drawing strength from the dog's steadfast presence. A shiver ran through the courtroom. The adults exchanged glances, the weight of the situation pressing down on everyone. Even seasoned deputies and lawyers felt a tightening in their chest. This was no ordinary case. The testimony of a child, paired with the behavior of a police dog, had transformed the courtroom into a crucible of raw, unfiltered truth. Prosecutor Jensen leaned in, voice gentle but firm. "Mia, do you remember anything else? Anything that can help us." Her small face scrunched in concentration. I remember a smell," she whispered. "Smoke, he smelled like smoke. And he was angry. Shadow was scared too, but he didn't leave. He stayed with me." Shadow growled softly, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to punctuate Mia's words. The dog's instincts were flawless, reading the room, reading the danger, reinforcing the child's testimony with a language humans could barely comprehend. The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat, muttering under his breath, "This is ridiculous. A child cannot testify about a dog's behavior." The judge's gavel came down sharply. "Objection noted and overruled. The witness may continue." Mia's eyes shifted slightly, scanning the room, landing on Uncle Ben's empty seat where he had been restrained. Her lips trembled, but her voice grew firmer. He has the box," she said. "He took it. I don't know what's inside, but Shadow knows it's bad." The courtroom collectively held its breath. The implications were staggering. A tangible object, stolen or hidden, verified through the testimony of a child, and confirmed through the instinctive reactions of a trained K-9. This was evidence that no one could ignore. Deputy Ross whispered reassurance. "You're safe, Mia. You're doing amazing. Just keep telling us what you remember." Mia's tiny head nodded. He left the box in the hallway," she said slowly. "Shadow barked. He tried to stop him. He was scared too, but he stayed with me. He didn't leave me." The judge exhaled, her voice measured but edged with tension. "Security will ensure the suspect remains contained. The witness is to be protected at all times. The testimony is vital." Mia's gaze drifted briefly to Shadow. The dog's eyes met hers, a silent exchange of courage and understanding. Then she looked forward, tiny face pale but determined. He's coming back," she whispered. The courtroom froze. Every adult, every reporter, every deputy felt the tension spike. Shadow's growl deepened, a living warning. Deputy Ross instinctively moved closer, hand hovering near Mia's shoulder, ready to act. Prosecutor Jensen leaned forward, voice calm but urgent. "Mia, tell us everything you remember," slowly. Mia swallowed hard, tiny chest rising and falling rapidly. He's angry," she whispered. "He wanted the box. He said if I told, Shadow would get hurt, but I remembered. I hid. I didn't cry. I stayed with Shadow." The courtroom shivered under the weight of her words. The raw courage of a 3-year-old, the instinctive behavior of a dog, and the unspoken fear of an adult in the room created a tension that no one could ignore. Shadow pressed close, growling low, muscles coiled. Deputy Ross's hand rested lightly on Mia, a steadying presence, a promise of protection. The judge's voice cut through the charged silence. "We will proceed. Witness, continue. Security, maintain vigilance. This is critical testimony." Mia inhaled deeply, small lips trembling. He's coming back," she repeated, voice soft but unwavering. "But Shadow is with me. He won't let anything happen." The courtroom exhaled collectively. Everyone realized that this tiny child, with the unwavering loyalty of a dog at her side, held the truth in her small hands. The tension was electric, the stakes higher than anyone had imagined, and the next words Mia spoke could change everything. And the courtroom waited, suspended on the edge of revelation, knowing that the truth, fragile and terrifying, was about to be fully revealed. The courtroom was electric with tension, every breath suspended as if the polished air itself was holding its collective anxiety. Shadow sat rigid at Mia's side, ears pricked, tail stiff, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to snap. His dark, intelligent eyes never left the empty chair where Uncle Ben had been restrained, scanning for any hint of movement. Deputy Ross crouched close to Mia, his presence a grounding force, one hand lightly brushing her shoulder, the other resting near Shadow in silent readiness. Mia pressed her face against Shadow's thick fur, drawing courage from his unwavering presence. Her tiny hands dug into his black coat as she whispered, He can't hide it. Shadow knows. Prosecutor Jensen leaned forward, voice calm but urgent. Mia, can you show us where the box was? Her eyes, wide with fear and focus, followed the imagined path she had traced in her mind. She clutched Shadow tightly, trembling, then pointed toward a small storage closet along the courtroom wall. There, she said, voice small but firm. He put it there. Shadow smelled it. He didn't like it. Deputy Ross nodded slowly, exchanging a glance with one of the officers stationed near the closet. Security, please check the area carefully, he instructed. Shadow let out a low growl, a warning that vibrated deep in the chest of every adult in the room. The dog's instincts were flawless, guiding the humans in a way that words could never convey. An officer approached cautiously, flashlight in hand, stepping toward the closet. The courtroom fell silent, every person leaning forward, eyes fixed on the unfolding moment. The air was thick with anticipation, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. The officer slowly opened the door, light spilling across the dark interior. Inside, amidst scattered papers and office supplies, sat a small, unassuming cardboard box. Its corners were slightly crushed, but its contents, hidden from view, seemed to radiate a sense of secrecy and weight. Shadow growled again, more insistent this time, eyes fixed on the box. Mia's small fingers clenched into his fur as she whispered, "That's it, that's the box." Deputy Ross stepped closer, crouching low to her level. "Mia, do you know what's inside?" She shook her head slowly, lips pressed together. "I don't, but he didn't want anyone to see it. Shadow knew it was bad." Her small voice carried the weight of certainty, a clarity beyond her years. Prosecutor Jensen gestured to the officer. "Please bring the box here, unopened." The officer approached the stand cautiously, carrying the box. Shadow's growl remained low, a steady warning. Mia's eyes followed every movement, her tiny chest rising and falling rapidly with fear and determination. The box was placed on a small table near the judge. Every adult in the courtroom leaned in slightly, their curiosity and tension almost unbearable. The air felt charged, electric with the weight of anticipation. Deputy Ross whispered gently to Mia, "It's okay, you did it, you helped us find it, Shadow helped too." Mia pressed closer to the dog, drawing courage from his presence. He tried to hide it, but Shadow found it, he knows. The judge removed her glasses, scanning the courtroom. "We will handle the contents carefully. Security, maintain your positions. This is critical evidence. Everyone else, remain calm." One of the officers slowly opened the box. Inside were several small items wrapped in fabric, partially charred, with a faint smell of smoke still lingering. The courtroom collectively inhaled, a murmur rippling through the room. Even seasoned deputies and attorneys exchanged tense glances. Mia's eyes widened. She pointed toward the contents, her tiny voice trembling but clear. That's it. That's what he took. Shadow," he tried to stop him. Shadow barked sharply, low and warning, his body tense. It was more than a dog reacting. His instincts, honed through years of training, confirmed the child's testimony. He had sensed danger, confronted it, and guided the humans to the truth. Prosecutor Jensen approached cautiously, glancing at Mia and then at the judge. "Your Honor, this box corroborates the child's testimony. The dog's reactions, combined with the child's observations, provide a clear link to the suspect's actions." The courtroom remained silent, the weight of the moment pressing down. Uncle Ben, still restrained nearby, shifted uneasily, realizing that the tangible proof of his misdeeds had been revealed. His eyes flicked toward Mia and Shadow, fear flashing across his pale face. Deputy Ross crouched next to Mia, whispering encouragement. "You're doing great. Shadow helped us find the truth. You're safe." Mia's small fingers traced the edge of the box. He tried to hide it," she said softly. "But Shadow knew. He smelled it, he didn't like it, he protected me." The judge exhaled slowly. "This is extraordinary testimony," she said, voice steady but tinged with awe. "The witness is a child, yet the clarity and corroboration from trained law enforcement make this evidence significant. Security, ensure the suspect is held safely. This courtroom will respect the gravity of this discovery." The reporters scribbled furiously, capturing the scene for live broadcasts, social media feeds, and headlines that would shock the community. Cameras clicked repeatedly, focusing on Mia, Shadow, and the box that now held the key to unraveling the truth. Uncle Ben shifted uncomfortably, muttering under his breath, but his voice was lost in the charged silence. Shadow growled again, low and warning, muscles coiled, eyes fixed on him. The dog's instincts radiated a silent but unmistakable message. Any threat to Mia would be met immediately. Deputy Ross glanced at Mia. "Do you want to tell the court what happened after he took the box?" Mia nodded, small fingers gripping Shadow tightly. He was angry. He said, "I couldn't tell anyone, but I remembered. I hid. Shadow stayed with me. He didn't leave. He protected me." The courtroom collectively shivered. The courage of a 3-year-old, paired with the instinctive behavior of a K-9, had transformed the case into a story of bravery, truth, and revelation. Even the most skeptical adults could not ignore the undeniable combination of memory, instinct, and tangible evidence. The judge nodded solemnly. "We will proceed carefully. Witness, your testimony has been invaluable. Security will maintain control of the suspect, and the evidence will be handled according to protocol." Mia's eyes met Shadow's, small but determined. He can't do it again," she whispered. "Shadow, he's with me. He won't let anything happen." Shadow nudged her gently with his nose, a silent affirmation of their bond. The dog's presence was a living testament to protection, loyalty, and courage, more eloquent than any human words could convey. The courtroom, still tense, collectively realized that the evidence, combined with Mia's memory and Shadow's instincts, had irreversibly changed the narrative. What had begun as a custody case had transformed into a confrontation with hidden danger, exposed by the most unlikely witnesses, a small child and a vigilant dog. Deputy Ross whispered one final reassurance. "You did it, Mia. You helped us find the truth. Shadow helped too. You're safe now." Mia leaned into Shadow, small chest rising and falling rapidly, drawing courage from his unwavering presence. "I know," she whispered. "He's scared too, but he stayed with me." The judge's gavel came down lightly, a call for order. "This courtroom will proceed with the evidence presented. Witnesses have spoken, and the protection of the child and the integrity of the case are paramount. We will continue." Shadow growled low and steady, eyes locked on Uncle Ben, who had been subdued but remained under guard. The message was clear. Any threat to Mia would be met immediately, instinctively, and without hesitation. And as the courtroom exhaled, collectively absorbing the weight of the moment, one undeniable truth hung in the air. The evidence had spoken, and it had chosen its witness. The courtroom was heavy with anticipation, every breath taut with the weight of what had already unfolded. The box rested on the evidence table, its contents partially revealed, partially a mystery that had transformed the proceedings into something far more intense than anyone had imagined. Shadow sat rigid beside Mia, black fur gleaming under the courtroom lights, eyes sharp and unblinking, every muscle coiled like a spring. He was more than a dog. He was guardian, witness, and silent arbiter of justice. Mia pressed her small face against him, drawing courage from his warmth and presence. Her tiny fingers clutched his fur, knuckles white with both fear and determination. She had faced the darkness, both literal and figurative, and survived. Now she was ready to see it through. Deputy Ross crouched beside her, his voice low and steady. "You've done amazing, Mia. Just stay close to Shadow. You're safe." Mia nodded slowly, eyes wide. "I'm ready," she whispered. The judge, composed but visibly tense, removed her glasses and scanned the courtroom. "We will proceed with the final phase of testimony," she announced. "All parties take your seats. Security, maintain control. Witness, remain protected. This court will hear the full account of events leading to the evidence presented." Prosecutor Jensen leaned forward, voice calm but urgent. "Mia, can you tell the court everything that happened from the beginning?" Mia swallowed hard, small chest rising and falling rapidly. Uncle Ben, he came in my room," she began, voice trembling but growing stronger with each word. "He smelled like smoke. He tried to take the box. He said I couldn't tell anyone. Shadow tried to stop him. He barked. He growled. He stayed with me. He didn't leave me." The courtroom fell silent, absorbing the raw courage of a child so young speaking with such clarity. Shadow growled softly, a low, protective vibration underlining her words, adding weight to the truth she spoke. Prosecutor Jensen nodded at Deputy Ross. "Mia, what happened after that?" Mia hesitated, then her lips pressed into a thin line. He left, but he looked at me. I knew he'd come back. Shadow stayed close. He was scared too, but he stayed. He protected me." The words resonated like a drumbeat of inevitability. Uncle Ben, still restrained by deputies, shifted uneasily, muttering under his breath. Fear now replaced the cold composure he had tried to maintain. Every eye in the courtroom was on him, weighing the testimony, the dog, and the tangible evidence that had been revealed. The judge's voice cut through the tension. "The witness has spoken. Security, maintain control of the suspect. This is a serious matter. The testimony and the evidence are to be considered with the utmost gravity." Mia's eyes flicked to the box. She pointed, small fingers trembling. "That's what he wanted," she said softly. "That's why he came. Shadow smelled it. He knew it was bad." Shadow's growl intensified, a low, vibrating rumble that seemed to fill the entire room. It was more than a warning, it was affirmation. He had sensed the danger, confronted it, and now the truth was fully laid bare. Prosecutor Jensen turned to the judge, voice calm but heavy with urgency. "Your Honor, the child's testimony, corroborated by the behavior of a trained K-9 and the evidence recovered, establishes a clear link to the suspect. The defense will have the opportunity to cross-examine, but the facts are undeniable." The defense attorney stood, attempting a composed tone, but his voice betrayed the tension in his body. "Your Honor, we object. A child of 3 cannot provide reliable testimony, nor can the behavior of a dog be considered evidentiary in any legal sense." The judge's gavel came down sharply. "Objection overruled. The testimony will stand. Security, ensure the integrity of the evidence and the safety of the witness." Mia shifted slightly, leaning closer to Shadow, who nudged her gently with his massive head. She drew courage from the dog, whose instincts had guided the adults to the box and had now confirmed, silently but undeniably, that the child's words were truth. The defense attorney attempted another objection, but even his voice sounded hollow compared to the tension in the room. Uncle Ben's shoulders slumped slightly, the first sign of real fear crossing his features. Shadow's growl continued, low and unwavering, as though reminding everyone present that the danger had not yet been fully neutralized. Deputy Ross crouched close to Mia, whispering softly, "You're safe now. You helped us find the truth. Shadow helped too." Mia nodded, small face pale but determined. He can't hurt anyone else," she whispered. Shadow won't let him." The judge's gaze swept over the courtroom. "The evidence, combined with the witness testimony, establishes sufficient grounds for proceeding with charges," she said firmly. "The court recognizes the extraordinary circumstances, a child's testimony corroborated by a trained K-9 and tangible evidence. The suspect will remain in custody pending further legal proceedings." Uncle Ben shifted uncomfortably in the chair, face pale, realizing that the story he had tried to hide was now exposed to every adult in the room. Shadow's growl resonated in his chest, a living reminder that Mia was protected, and that any attempt to threaten her again would be met with immediate response. Mia's eyes shifted to the box once more. She reached out a tiny hand to touch it, and Shadow leaned in, pressing his massive head gently against her. His body radiated calm strength, a shield for the child who had faced unimaginable fear. Prosecutor Jensen turned to the court. "Your Honor, the combination of eyewitness testimony from the child, the behavior of the trained K-9, and the tangible evidence establishes a narrative that cannot be ignored. This court has witnessed a unique convergence of bravery, instinct, and truth." The courtroom was silent. Every adult, every reporter, every officer seemed to collectively absorb the magnitude of what had unfolded. A 3-year-old child, with the unwavering loyalty of a trained dog, had brought hidden truths into the light. The judge nodded slowly. This case demonstrates that truth can come from unexpected sources. The witness and the K-9 have provided testimony and evidence that must be considered in full. Security will ensure the suspect remains contained. The court will reconvene for further proceedings, but today, justice has been advanced. Mia pressed her small face against Shadow's fur, exhaling shakily. "We did it," she whispered. Shadow nudged her again, as if to affirm her bravery and the bond that had carried them through the darkest moments. Deputy Ross crouched beside her, brushing a gentle hand over her shoulder. "Yes, Mia, you did it. You helped stop him. Shadow stayed with you every step of the way." Shadow let out a soft, satisfied whine, muscles relaxing slightly now that the immediate threat had been neutralized. His eyes, however, never left Uncle Ben, who remained under the vigilant watch of deputies, aware that any sudden move would trigger instinctual protection from the dog that had become as much a witness as Mia herself. The reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every detail, every expression, every moment of the unfolding narrative. Cameras zoomed in on Mia, Shadow, and the box that had become a symbol of courage, truth, and unflinching vigilance. Uncle Ben, restrained and pale, finally seemed to understand that his actions had been laid bare, and that the courtroom, backed by instinct, courage, and evidence, had collectively acknowledged the severity of his deeds. Deputy Ross whispered softly to Mia, "You've been incredibly brave. Shadow helped and so did you. The truth is out. You're safe now." Mia hugged Shadow tightly, small arms wrapped around his massive neck. "I know," she whispered. "Shadow, he stayed with me. He won't let anyone hurt me." The judge's gavel came down lightly, a symbol of finality, authority, and the weight of truth. Court is adjourned. Witnesses are to remain under protection, and the integrity of the evidence will be maintained. Justice has taken its first steps today, and the court acknowledges the extraordinary courage shown by all involved. The courtroom exhaled, a collective release of tension, fear, and awe. The story, which had begun with the terror of a tiny child in the face of danger, had unfolded into a narrative of courage, instinct, and revelation. Shadow pressed close to Mia one last time, eyes scanning the room, body relaxed but vigilant. He had guided the humans, protected the child, and witnessed justice in action. Mia leaned into him, whispering softly, "We did it, Shadow. We stopped him." The dog nudged her gently, a silent affirmation of loyalty and protection. And for the first time that day, in the polished, tense courtroom, a small smile flickered across Mia's face. The darkness had been faced. The truth had been revealed. And justice, guided by courage, instinct, and an unbreakable bond, had prevailed.